Students, this is Dr. Vibha Tiwari. In my previous two videos, I had taken up K.N. Daruwala's famous poem Underwater Notes, and I had covered up till part 4 in the previous video. So today I am going to proceed further. Let's have part 5 of the poem. Seated on the hull of your boat, you lurch and tilt. The horizon is the forest, darkening leaf on darkening sky. Slot your time properly in the right keys. It's a very beautiful stanza, particularly the one for which Daruwala is known. As I told you in the very beginning when I had taken up the poem, that the thing with which he is very much associated is his use of imagery. The whole stanza is replete with imagery, and a beautiful metaphorical language has been used here. He says, seated on the hull of your boat, you lurch and tilt. Here, boat stands for your life. He says, when you are just rowing the boat of your life, you lurch and tilt. Very often, you get an unsteady motion. See, in life, nothing is certain. We cannot say anything for surety. And one has to just proceed further in life in a state of ignorance, and it's a kind of bliss also, because when we don't know what is actually going to happen to us in the future, we can comfortably lead on our lives. So that's what the poet is saying. Seated on the hull of your boat, you lurch and tilt. When you are sitting on the hull of your boat, that means when you are actually leading your life, very often you lurch and tilt. Just like the boat, it lurches and tilts. It has an unsteady motion very often. In the same way, in life also, nothing is certain, nothing is sure. We also have an unsteady, wavering motion in our lives. The horizon is the forest. Now here forest stands for the future. Horizon, the particular, you can say, state where one can see the earth and the sky mingling together. Now here horizons, it is suggesting the mingling of the present and the future. He says the horizon is the forest. That means when we are living our lives, we are always looking at the future. We are always worried about the future. We are always concerned about the future. So when we are rowing the boat of our lives, at that time, though we are having an unsteady motion, still we are all the time bothered about future. We don't worry about present. We don't care about present. It's a well-known fact, though, that if you just sow your seeds in the in present in a better way, naturally you are going to reap a good harvest in future. But nobody cares about this fact. Everybody is concerned about future only, without just making any sort of efforts for its betterment in the present itself. So he says, seated on the hull of your boat, you lurch and tilt. The horizon is the forest, darkening leaf on darkening sky. See, we don't know, as I told you in the very beginning, we don't know what is going to happen. We even don't know what is going to happen in the next instant. And here we are planning for 100 years. You can say all the time we are just looking forward and making plans of, you can say, a span of some 100 years. Even some are thinking about the coming generations, making plans about the coming generation, when we even don't know what is going to happen to us in the very next instant. So he says it's a kind of darkening leaf on a darkening sky. It's a state of complete darkness, utter darkness. The future is dark. It's bleak. We don't have any clear picture of the future. Still we are always striving for it. We are always making efforts for it. So he's giving you a kind of suggestion, he's giving you a kind of advice. He says, slot your time properly in the right keys. If you really want to enjoy future, if you really want to have a good future, then you have to make efforts for it in the present time itself. He says slot your time properly, just manage your time in a better way, in a good way, in the right caves. Here cave stands for the you can say division of the time in proper slots. That means the proper efforts to be done at the appropriate time. He says one should take appropriate steps at perfect time so that one could have the good result at end. And but we all the time we are the ones who are ignoring this fact. So he says all the time we are rowing the boat of our life, and the boat is all the time, it is lurching and tilting. That means it is always having an unsteady motion. In this way we are always proceeding towards the future which is utter dark, future which is completely bleak, which we are completely oblivious. Still we are always trying to make it better, and instead of making any efforts in the present. So advising everyone, the poet says that you have to slot your time properly, you have to divide your time properly, you have to make appropriate efforts in the present, in the right caves. That means you have to just divide your time, you have to give the needed attention to a particular thing or a particular object or a particular person, if you want to make your future bright, if you want your future better. The sea is the present, the forest is the future. Now as I told you that a great metaphor has been used. He clearly says the sea is the present. The present time is comparable to the sea, which is all full of disturbance, where the you can say sailor is rowing the boat and having an unsteady motion of the boat. The sea is comparable to the present, because we in the present time we face the problems, we have to find the solutions, we have to give just answers to the question in the present itself. So he says the sea is the present, the forest is the future, and the thing which propels you onwards, which gives you the much needed motivation to lead your lives, is the future. So sea is the present, the forest is the future. Speech is present tense, echo is the future. Now it's a very beautiful line. He says speech is present tense. What we are doing, our actions, our action time is present, and those actions, those things which we do in our present, they are going to pave way for our future. They are going to decide the future course of events. So he says speech is the present, speech is present tense, echo is the future. Whatever we are doing, whatever we are saying in present, that is the most important thing, because it is actually the echo of the present that we are going to have in the future. Whatever we are going to plan, whatever we are going to do here in the present will decide our future. If you are talking of echoes, you're talking of walls. Now again same metaphorical language is being continued by the poet here also. He says if you're talking of echoes, you're talking of walls. See, how is echo created? Echo is then only created when the sound gets stricken against some hard surface, most probably a wall or a rock. So he says if you're talking of echoes, you're talking of walls. If you talk of water echo, you are discussing womb walls. He says, now here he is pointing out the fact that when the child is in the womb of one's mother, the echo or the sound one gets to hear is the sound of the womb walls. His voice or her voice gets echoed when it strikes against the womb walls. Old territory, come out of it. But he says now it's old territory, now you have grown up, just come out of it, don't be childish, leave that. See, when the child is inside the body of the mother, he is safe and secure, he does not have to bother about future or anything like that. So that is the, I think, most contented state of the person, of a human being. So he says one has to come out of that comfort zone, one has to take decisions for one's own self when one has to proceed in the life and to just have that kind of future of which he or she is dreaming. So he says if you are talking of echoes, walls. You're talking of walls. One has to think, if there is kind of echo, if we, echo here stands for future, as he said earlier. If you are planning of any kind of future, at least be aware of the present. And especially if you are talking about water echo, that means here the image of the mother's womb is being captured. He says when the child is inside the mother, he is quite safe, and he does not have to bother about anything. But now the time has come when you have to step out of that old territory. Just come out of it. Unsure on land, you take to the sea. And when the child takes birth and when he gets his consciousness, he is quite unsure. The child means as we progress in our lives, we are quite unsure of the future. That means the land here stands for the present time. Land and sea, they both stand for the present time, and the land here stands basically for those days when we are not worried about the future, when we are not concerned about the future, when we don't have any solid plan for the future, and it's a kind of state of ignorance or unsurety. So he says, unsure on land, you take to the sea. And as we start realizing the things, we start rowing the boat of our life. So we just step out of the land, we just board on a ship, that means board on a ship of life, which is comparable to life. We start progressing in life, though that sense of ignorance, though that sense of unsurety is still there, but at least it is better than the previous one, because now we are in a stage where we can think about the future. The skyline is a forest, fern dark, shadow dark. And he again and again suggests the same thing. He says, when we are progressing in our lives, nothing is clear to us. We start heading towards an unclear destination, an unknown destination, because what is going to happen to us in the future, none is sure about it. So we just start leading our lives without knowing what is there in store for us in the future. Fern dark, shadow dark. It's like the darkness of the fern trees, because future has been compared with the forest. So most probably these tropical forests, these rainforests where there is plenty of fern, these are the darkest ones. So he says future is as dark as it is pitch dark, it's shadow dark, like the darkness of the fern trees in the forest, gravelled with white coral grit. And the only thing shining in that darkness is the whiteness of the coral grit. That means the person who is rowing the boat of life, the only thing that gives him the motivation to lead on is the whiteness of the coral. That means you can say the small achievements that one has in the course of his life, those things motivate him or her to lead on in the life. So these graveling white coral here stands for the small, or the, you can say, the achievements, not those great achievements. Every day we achieve something in our lives. So those achievements have been compared with the white coral grit, and these are the things which actually propel us onwards, which motivate us to go onwards in our lives. So the future which is comparable to a dark forest, fern dark forest, pitch dark forest, the only thing which makes us row our boats of life is the presence of coral grits, white coral grits, the small achievements that we do in our day-to-day lives. These are the things which make us propel onwards in our lives. Now we come to the part 6 of the poem, and it's a very important part. Whatever evil he suffered, he forgot, said Mills in one of his poems. Now Mills is a very famous Polish poet. Polish poet means he belonged to Poland, and it is his very famous quote. He says, if one is able to forget whatever evils one suffered, he can have a very contented life. It's a state of bliss that he can enjoy if one has the power to forgive and forget. Even in Hindu mythology, in Hindu dharma, Gita preaches the same thing. If one has the power to forget and if one has the power to just forgive, one lives a saintly life. It is what sainthood is all about. We normal human beings rarely have this tendency. Neither we are able to forget an incident, especially you can say bitter experience, nor we are able to forgive someone if one has caused us any kind of trouble. But according to Milos, the famous Polish poet, he says if whatever evil he suffered he forgot. He says if one is able to forget whatever evils one suffered, that person will reach the state of bliss. So whatever evil he suffered he forgot, says Milos in one of his poems. Now that's a scrap of myth, isn't it? He says we, the present generation, we are going to treat this fact as a scrap of myth. As I told you that it's very difficult to forgive someone if one has caused you a trouble. Similarly, it is very difficult to just forget an incident of our lives if that is a bitter one. So he says, when somebody tells us to do the same, we feel it's a scrap, it's all trash, it's a useless advice. So he says now that's a scrap of myth, isn't it? He says it's quite mythical, it appears to us as a myth if we are able to do so. And it is one thing to forgive and another to forget. And in our lives we have very clear cut definitions of what is forgiveness and what is forgetfulness. So he says we are so much engrossed in the worldly affairs, we are having so much weaknesses, human weaknesses in our own selves. We have anger, we have hatred, we have jealousy. So in such a state it is very, very difficult, rather impossible for a person to forgive or forget. So clearly if somebody suggests us to do so, we immediately become aggressive. And for us, forgiving something and forgetting someone, it is totally different. I try to put things behind me in the backyards of memory clutter. He says, even I here stands for the poet himself. He says, even I have also tried to put things behind those unhappy memories. I also try to put them at the backyard of memory clutter. My memory, which is in a state of clutter, in a state of chaos, even I have tried. Like when somehow we try to arrange a particular wardrobe, sometimes we are just trying to arrange that thing. What we do, we try to just hide the things behind the arranged ones. So he says my memory is in a state of chaos, is in a state of clutter, and I also try to put things behind the backyard of my memory lane, and went back to my flirtations with altitudes. And he says, instead of indulging very much in the memories of the bygone days, I want to lead my life in the present moment. And thereby, in order to distract myself, I gave my own self wholly to my hobby, and that was a flirtation with altitudes, that means trekking or hiking. Touched the Karakorams at Siachen, touched. Hindi has such a lovely word for its perch. He says, I also spent a very good time just trekking, or you can say trying to cross the the mountain or the valleys, and thereby giving a kind of distraction to my own self from my old memories. I wanted to dissociate myself from the old memories of that ancestral house or from the memories of the ancestors by indulging in such kind of adventure sports like trekking and hiking. And I have also touched the Karakoram at Siachen. It is Karakoram is the mountain range. It's you can say at the border of Pakistan and China, very much near to India. So even I have tried to touch that, and I have gone to the Siachen area. I think you all are very much aware of that particular place which is always in news for the military activities and the disputes that arise between India and China. So this Karakoram mountain range, it is at the Indo-Chinese border, and it is also a part of Pakistan also touches it. Touched, Hindi has such a lovely word for its sparsh. He says, I have used the word touch. In Hindi, there is a very good word sparsh. Now, when you speak this word sparsh, the movement of the tongue and the lips, they come in close contact, and it is actually the Hindi word sparsh that gives a very lively meaning to the actual word touch. Nubra, the garden of the north, and slept in a tent at Somoriri. Now these are the places in Ladakh. These are very beautiful places. Nubra is a valley, and it is also known as the garden of the north. And Somoriri, it's a lake area in Ladakh. So he says, I have spent a great time in adventure sports, especially in the northeastern area of India. I have also been to Nubra. I have been at Somoriri. The rocks brown, the lake blue, and I have noticed, very minutely observed in my present time, my surroundings. See, in the previous stanzas, he told that when I was young and had visited my ancestral place, at that time I did not notice much the surroundings of that place much. That's why when somebody told me that the place is very much at where it was earlier, I was surprised, because for me things had changed. But he says, in the present time, I do notice what kind of surroundings I have. So I have been to Ladakh, I have been to the valley of Nubra, I have been to the Somoriri, and I have enjoyed my spell over there. And I have observed the brownishness of the rocks and the bluishness of the lakes. I got hold of a scrap of a myth here. And he says, as I was staying over there, I happened to just come across a myth. At 15,000 feet, it's a good scrap to grab. Now, it's a very, you can say, humorous kind of line. He says, when you are 15,000 feet high from the ground level, these are the things that really give you a kind of pleasure or a kind of motivation to go on. These myths, these stories that one happens to listen from the mouths of the locals, these are the things one cherishes long after coming back. So he also happened to listen to one such kind of story. It was very hot, and a woman called Somo, riding a yak, couldn't rein him in. And the story, as told to him, was like that in the hot weather, there was a woman. See, Ladakh most of the time is covered with snow. Very short span of summer comes over there, and that even the scorching heat of the sun becomes unbearable, because the sunlight strikes against the ice, the snow which is covering the glaciers, and when it falls on the ice, it is rather unbearable. So he says, it was very hot, and a woman called Somo, riding a yak, couldn't rein him in. There was a lady called Somo, and she was riding a yak, and the time was very hot, and she could not control that yak. As the yak made straight for the lake, she kept shouting, "Re, re, 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 stop, stop," in Tibetan. Though she was trying to stop that yak, she was shouting the word "re, re." That means stop, stop in Tibetan. But she could not control that yak. But the yak went in, and they both drowned. The yak didn't listen her, and they both got drowned as it entered the lake. So similarly, why this story has been mentioned by the poet here, he simply wants to tell you that if you rely very much on the past, or if you just all the time start thinking about future, naturally you are going to plunge in the present time. One has to live in the present time. One has to make connections with the past. One has to take notice of the future. Then only one can have the equilibrium in life. Otherwise, one will have to face the same situation as Somo faced while controlling the yak. She had to die just because she could not control whatever there was in her hands in the present. So one should try to control the present instead of worrying about the future, or just all the time fretting about the past. Now we come to the last part of this poem, the part 7. The stars have flung their net into the sea among the thrashing fish shoal, and the lassoed crab look for me. He says, as I told you, that in his dreams he is revisiting that place. So he says, it's a dreamy atmosphere. It's a kind of dream that he is weaving in this particular part. He says, the stars have flung their net into the sea. It appears to me that as if the stars have flung their net into the sea. That means as if this particular sight of nature is capturing my heart, as if whatever memories I had with my in my mind about the past, all those horses of those memories, they have been unleashed and they are running on their own. And among the thrashing fish wall and the lassoed crab, look for me. See, this particular paragraph has two meanings. One, the poet says, if you want to find me in my present state, just go for some adventurous site, some fishing site, and then you'll be able to find me. The surface meaning is this. And the deeper meaning is this: if one wants to really get in touch with the poet, one will have to rely on one's association with a person who is in a state of trance. He says, but perhaps he's in a state of trance, perhaps he's in a state of dream, and in his dreams he's just thinking that he is on a fishing site. So he says, if one wants to meet him, one will have to come to that place. Or we can also say that whatever memories were there, they were weaving a magical web for him in his mind. That web has now been thrown, that spell has now been cast on him, and these fishes and these stars are all the memories associated with his ancestral home and ancestors. He says, if you really want to meet me, just try to take me out from the web of memories that I have, that you can say at present, in which I am entangled. At present I am entangled in the web of memories, those memories which are as bright as the stars, which are as beautiful as the you can say fish shawl, and which is as pleasant to me as catching of a crab. If you really want to meet me, you have to just dissociate myself from all those memories. Or in the present scenario, if you really want to meet me, you'll have to visit such a site where I'll be indulged in these adventure sports. So on the whole, we can say that it's a very beautiful poem, full with metaphors, replete with metaphors, and it is a poem which suggests that the poet, who did not care for his ancestors or ancestral home in his youth, is really craving for their company, for the company of for his home. And see, what are dreams? These are the suppressed things which are there in our subconscious minds. So somehow those things, those dream, relate us with those suppressed desires. So it is the suppressed desire of the poet to visit his ancestral house that has motivated him to pen this poem. So that's all from my side.